I'm Brodeur, and this is Why We Game. And my guest today is Bob Brodeur, or Brodeur the Elder. It's pretty remarkable being in this basement because this not only is this larger than my house, your gaming room, but it is obsessively organized and remarkable. It's like Santa's workshop for toy soldiers down here. It's pretty fucking crazy. And then looking at this table, how many Easterlings is this, Bob? What am I looking at?
It's barely about 90. It's one of my smaller Lord of the Rings forces. So yeah, these are all the official GW figs. I don't always use those, but these, I really liked the style of the movie. So I really liked the figs that GW came out, which were 100% true to the style. So yeah, I've got about a little under 100. Most of the infantry I had painted in Sri Lanka. All of the officers, all of the cavalry, I did myself. There's a few minor conversions in there that I did myself, but yeah, that's, again, I was doing a parade on the Let Adventure forum, so I've been collecting complete painted Lord of the Rings armies, taking some photos and throwing them up. It's what Mr. Kilgore calls a parade.
Parade.
Yes.
So wow, that's absolutely fantastic. Now, you said this is a small number of toy soldiers at around 90?
Yeah, we're sitting at a 4x6 gaming table, and my Mordor army for Lord of the Rings, and this is just my GW collection, not my other orc collections, literally covered the table.
What's the size of this table?
4x6.
4x6. So a traditional tabletop wargaming table. That is outrageous. I have said a number of times, or at least I said once famously on Fear the Boot, that you took umbrage with.
I smell toast.
What's that? I do smell toast. I'm having a stroke. Everything up to the stroke has been edited out, but I was stumbling over my words as I often do. Once on Fear the Boot, I suggested that you were the Da Vinci of tabletop gaming because you had this constant rotation of finished and unfinished projects and games that you're working on and concept. Like the whole place down here is a testament to something that will be done someday, right? So this project is amazing and finished and it's on the shelf, but there's a dozen other projects that are being processed right now. And that, to me, is Da Vinci-like. It always reminded me of Hudson Hawk and seeing those early shots of Da Vinci's workshop and just shit everywhere. That reminds me, except he wasn't organized like you are.
Yeah, I mean, I from that perspective, I just think I know role players and role-playing game writers that are, and I could name them if you want, that are orders of magnitude better than me at DMing and at character development and plot development. I know miniature painters that are infinitely better than me. I happen to be in a situation where I'm sort of good at all of these things. I've spent a lot of the energy of my life, both in terms of time and social and finances, just on these hobbies. Yeah, I do things to excess. I do a lot of different things. I mean, but yeah, I would not say, I mean, the thing about, why I think your thing is hyperbolic to the point of ridiculousness is that individual was literally a planetary overtime master of all of those crafts, whereas I just happen to be sort of good enough not to be embarrassed at all of these crafts.
That I think is ridiculous. Just good enough to be embarrassed. I mean,
not embarrassed.
You have the famous Brodeur false humility of tearing yourself down. You're a genius. And you are the reason that I game. And the show's called Why We Game. And I game because I idolize my older brother. You've had a tremendous influence on me, but not just on me, on our circle of friends. Then you also had a brief career as a professional game writer, game designer, but I'll get to all that. We'll unpack all this. First and foremost, let's go back to, you're 51 years old.
I am.
Well, like most of the people that I've interviewed thus far, lived through that wonderful satanic panic time. But let's go all the way back. What was your first exposure to the hobby?
Well, going back to you mentioned Fear the Boot. You and I talked about this during my one guest appearance, such as it was, on Fear the Boot. So, as you say, you're my brother, so we grew up together. Our parents, such as they were, knew a guy that they were friends with who, I think he owned a game store in downtown St. Louis. I know he gamed. I know he had a basement that was much smaller. It was kind of one of those St. Louis townhouse, but he had a setup not unlike this. So just with the parents spending time with him, he sort of brought up this notion of gaming, in particular the miniature gaming, and he had a sand table, which was kind of that old style of terrain that people don't really do very...
Well, so do me a favor. For the listener that does not have any idea what the fuck you're talking about, what the hell is a sand table?
Okay, a sand table is, so we're sitting at basically just kind of a standard game table like you might see at any game shop, so it's 4x6, heavy legs, kind of built with the same construction styles you might build a deck, flat plywood top, and then you build up terrain on it. Like this one, I still use to this day. I've had this thing for probably 25, 30 years, a wool army blanket, and then just terrain that I build up off it with foam and paint and a lot of railroad style techniques. Now there's an older style that people don't really do anymore for a lot of reasons, where the table would, instead of being a flat top, would be a tray. You would literally fill that tray with sand. People would use spray bottles, those plastic little spray bottles like you get at Walmart to wet it. You could shape it. You could sprinkle the same kind of flocks that people today, might use to permanently grass, kind of the foam terrain that I generally do. You can just sprinkle it on the sand and spray it with water. And so if you spend the time on it, you could really make a nice contour. It gives you that negative space, which a sheet of plywood does not give you. So that would be the thing. So you could form hills and valleys and rivers, and you could color them, and you could sprinkle it with lichen and gravel and ballast, all that sort of things. So you could get a very, very realistic table with that. People don't do it anymore because they're exceedingly heavy. Sand's surprisingly not cheap, weirdly enough. It's a lot of work.
Well, what an insufferable pain in the ass it must have been what do you have to then you sift all of your sand to get all the flock and garbage out of it if you want to do it again, or do you just leave it that way forever?
Some of both. But I think, and of course there's, going back, I know a little bit I'm kind of a jack of all trades in this hobby. But I think one of the big factors is that, again, kind of looking at these painted figures, we happen to be sitting across the army, like you said, the sand's really hard on figs. So if you didn't spend a lot of time painting, or like David, the guy who we're talking about, he used unpainted figs. He didn't base them, he didn't paint them, so he would just stick the little castings of lead in the sand, and the sand would hold them up. It's perfect for that scenario. But I would not subject these figures to sand. Again, people used to not paint as much, or people used to use different painting techniques. They would use more oils. They would use a lot less, shading and highlighting and so on and so forth. And then they would just gloss the hell out of them, which would make them sand resistant. But even so, sand's hard on them. With the kind of the modern techniques that most people are using, sand wrecks them. So it's just not a thing.
So you do a lot with miniatures, particularly using them as a tool in your tabletop role-playing games. And from childhood, most of what I recall was you focusing on role-playing games just for accessibility and cost, I assume. But were you more into role-playing games than miniatures as a kid, or am I misremembering?
No, you're right. There were several reasons why. So we went to this guy David's house, he was a friend of the parents, and I saw his basement, I saw his models, and I thought it was really, really cool, and I wanted to get into it. But our dad was more into the 1/35th scale Tamiya style plastic model kits. So when I said, hey, I'm really interested in these models, that was sort of where directed me, because I think that's what he knew. But eventually, over time, I was able to kind of start collecting the metal figs. The original Grenadier box sets were the first things I had. So you get those these are classic. If you're new to gaming, you just got to look these up just for fun. These Grenadier was the name of the company, and they would sell these little cardboard boxes with a little blue foam tray, and they had these. They're very delightful and charming and nostalgic little figures inside. And I still have a couple just to have. I have like the halfling set, but there was the classic adventurer set. So I got some of those for D&D, and I painted them with Tester's enamels.
Stupid
nasty.
Little bottles with the square bottle with the metal top. The worst.
Yeah, no, they are terrible. And of course, I have these migraines, which I was only just coming on then, and those chemical smells really jump on the migraines. So I bought those, but those were, as you say, role-playing aids. My original thing was I was really interested in role-playing all the way through college. I had some miniatures, I had a few 40K figs, I had some fantasy figs that I'd collected kind of here and there. all the way through college, I was much more focused in role-playing. You know, the miniature games thing, it didn't necessarily come second, but it was always my second love. In college for role-playing, you know, we didn't even use tokens or counters 99% of the time. You know, just a sheet of paper, we'd draw little pencil lines. Okay, I'm moving over here and then draw a curve or whatever.
Right.
So it really wasn't until I started shopping at it, and I had collected some. I guess when I was in grad school, I collected some. I got a job that got some extra money, and I was involved a little bit in Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And so I bought some figs with, I actually, while I was in Masters, I studied theater. I got a gig on a movie on Truman for HBO. And for me at the time, it was a mountain of money. So I spent that money very stupidly. And among other things, I bought a lot of figs. So that was one of the things I did. I wanted to bulk up my Warhammer armies that I'd kind of built up slowly in college. But again, mostly it was role-playing. It wasn't really until after I graduated from my master's that miniatures really became my thing I spend more time on, which is what they are now.
So you're role-playing in high school?
Absolutely, yeah.
So did you have difficulty finding a group of people to play with you? Is this something that you had to do on the down low?
Sort of. Well, I mean, I was an unusual cat at that age, you know, in a lot of ways. So the fact that I was gaming in the mid-'80s when it wasn't cool was just the icing on the, man, that's a weird dude cake, right? So it didn't really mean anything to me. You know, we moved, or as you remember, we moved a lot. And when we moved out to O'Fallon, Missouri, and I was enrolled in St. Dominic High School, and very early on there, almost my first week or so there, just by coincidence, I bumped into a kid in history class, and I said something, and he turned around and said something, and we both realized we game. And then, so that hooked me up with, of course, you know, Steve and Bill and a few others that were, those are really the only two that I still stay in contact with. But there was a group of us, and that, you know, at various levels of outsiderness, from hardly outside at all to extremely outside. And we all gamed, and that was how we spent our weekends. And that's what I did all through high school.
And you still game with most of those guys to this day?
I still game really with one of those guys to this day.
So your group then, because you game with a lot of people from college, is that right?
That's right, yeah. So Steve and I went to the same college. And there we met up with a different group of guys. And yeah, I still game with those guys to this day. And those guys are still essentially my best friends to this day. So there's another guy that I game with in high school that I stayed in contact with, but we don't game as much together anymore.
How much did you steal from Walden Books? See, I pitched this to Mike Webb from Alliance. Mm-hmm. Mike's the vice president of customer service and marketing at Alliance. And I asked him, I said, a lot of people from my generation have this story where they discover pornography in the woods. Like the first time they see a porno mag, they were with their buddies in the woods doing whatever dumb stuff, and they find pornography. I think that there's a subsect of people in the gaming industry, or in the gaming hobby, I should say, a subsect of people in the gaming hobby that started their collections by robbing Walden Books blind. Now, I know that I was one of those people that I'm pretty sure that the Walden Books in Cave Springs closed because my buddy in that time in my childhood, he and I we stole so much fucking D&D from them. I'm so ashamed of it, but it's true.
Well, it wasn't Walden Books. There was a model store, near where our great grandma lived, where some friends of mine that I have since, they were not my best influence, and I was not their best influence. So yeah, I was not 100% free of that. That's one of those things I wish I could take back. But I would say that most of it was not, I know I got my blue box set as a gift as a kid with the crappy dice you had to crayon in, still one of my fondest memories of all time. So I did get some of that as gifts as a kid. I got some of it as, lawn mowing money or whatnot. A little bit of it was purloined, which again, not very happy about, but I don't have, if I had a time machine, that's not what I would fix. In terms of awful mistakes I've made. And then at 16, I mean, I think like I was a week after my 16th birthday and I walked to the local McDonald's and got a job, and I've had a job ever since. So, and I've spent a disproportionate amount on my income on this crap ever since. Much to the, thankfully I've gotten lucky since then, but otherwise I'd be in a lot of trouble at a 51-year-old.
Why do you think that it has stuck with you after all of these years? Why is it something that you started doing as a kid? Honestly, I think I started doing this stuff because it was just easier and more accessible than drugs or some other form of escapism. This was an easy thing to fall into and pretend to be something I'm not, or escape the world that I was in at that time. You don't need that anymore.
Yeah, maybe I do.
All right. Well, so why has it stuck with you?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. That sort of thing, and we don't want to talk about it here, but we did talk about it quite a bit on Fear the Boot, and of course you were there. It does stick, right? It doesn't go away, right? Now it gets better, for sure. I mean, that's the whole campaign for the other issue, which is great, but it definitely gets better, but it doesn't go away.
No, I mean gaming. Why have you stuck with the hobby?
That's what I mean.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I misunstood you. You were getting very serious, and I was like, I'm lost.
No. No, it's that same need for escapism that was life or death at 17, 18, 15, 14 remains necessary. I mean, honestly, that's a big part of it. A second part of it, I flat enjoy it, right? I mean, I really enjoy, well, like I said, just by coincidence, we happen to have the Easterling Army out.
Do you? Do you enjoy it? Like, I wonder that if I enjoy it, and I see how frustrated you get when you're gaming, and I think, my God, it's like because it's not perfect, it's infuriating, and I don't know if you feel that way, but sometimes I think I see it in your face, like I know it's in mine.
Yeah, it can be. But no, I do enjoy it. I absolutely, finishing a project, right? Like even this Easterling project, finishing the project like this Easterling project, there's something to it, right? I can, even though it's not the best painted army in the world and so on and so forth, it's mine, right? And I can look at that and be like, I did that. Even the stuff that I sent to Sri Lanka, they worked off my pattern that I'd given them. I went and inked it. I based it. If you really care, you can look through and see, those are the pike conversions that you use with these off-brand pikes, right? Like that's the factory pike, that's the off-brand pike. Right. Just little stuff like that. How I swapped out my horses and stuff, how I added shields to my commanders. I did that. And it's a thing, right? I had this in my head. I bought the pieces and I spent the time and now I have it on the table, and that's a thing. And I feel the same way about role-playing games to a large degree. The difference between, the miniature collecting and miniature painting, and to a lesser extent the miniature gaming and role-playing is that you don't have that, there was very little that could have stopped me from having this army look like I wanted it to, right? It's just not a thing. Like, what's going to happen? No one's going to come in and say, haha, these cloaks are blue. Not a thing. With role-playing games, it can be a thing. But with role-playing games, it could be that blue would have been way better on these cloaks, right? And I look back and I say, I had this vision of this story in my head, maybe 3 times out of 5, it doesn't quite go where I want. And I was like, that was fun. I got to spend time with my friends, and that's a cool story. And maybe 1 time out of 5, it goes, yeah, that's kind of, but there's that 1 time out of 5 where and I used to say this when I was in theater too, that it's magic. Right? That something happens, that there's a synergy at the table. The story kind of goes the way you imagined, but it turns in a way you didn't imagine. And somebody saw this thing that fits perfect that you didn't see, but because they're them and they have it in perspective, and it all falls together in this amazing way. And so yeah, I enjoy it. Yeah.
You see, I like to describe it, and you're my brother, you know me, you know that I have a tendency to be crass and vulgar and whatever, so this will be no surprise to you. Sure. I liken it to being a woman who has difficulty climaxing. You have sex with some regularity, but sometimes you come, and when you do, it makes all those other times you bang some Pierre without coming worth it.
Is that a thing for women? Because I've never known that women think that
way. Yes, it's apparently.
Wow.
Now, what I've read,
I have not heard
on the deepest, darkest bowels of the internet. Apparently, that's a thing that women can sometimes be in relationships with heterosexual men and find that they have difficulty climaxing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, right.
Has that been going on for a long time?
Since the dawn of time.
Wow. Never heard of it.
All right, so you're 51.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually.
You keep hitting that drum, don't
eventually, because I like to talk about people's age because I think it provides an important context. If I was sitting across the table from somebody who is 27, their experience in gaming is completely different because it has become more accessible, more acceptable, and frankly, games are way easier today than they were. I mean, I'm glad that I'm an old person now and I wasn't 45 playing 2nd edition D&D. I just fucking quit.
Can you imagine?
I can't, I'm out.
The combat computer from 1st edition. You remember that? Because I don't even know if my Guisarm Bardichamoid is +3 or +2 versus scale mail, or it's -1 against plate mail. Oh, and in this case, -1 is good.
Or they reprinted Chivalry and Sorcery, and I was like, why? I was at a shop recently. I saw that book. I was like, dude, that time's over. It's over. It's done. Stop. Stop. It's like Games Workshop wants to come back and do, hey, we're going to revisit the old world. Well, don't do the Conveyor of Death. That's passé. That type of gaming is done. Let's move to something new.
You know, it's funny you say that because one of the miniature games that I'm really looking forward to, and I know that the guys at the shop, the miniature guys at the shop, are all looking forward to, is Oathmark, which is a call back to
the Conveyor of Death.
I can't promise that there's a Conveyor of Death. I've not read it, but I do know that it's ranked units. You know, of course, I mean, that's why I got my movement trays. The game system that these are made for is not a movement tray game, but, you know, so they've got the ranked units, rank and file, and hana, and so I don't know that there'll be a Conveyor Belt of Death. That I can't promise.
There's Conquest Last Argument of Kings, which does very similarly to Games Workshop's War of the Ring, where you have square movement trays and then you group movement trays together. It still has a casualties fall off the back sort of thing. I was hoping it would do something like Demon World, but I'm getting really way off topic.
Yeah, no, people have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, they're like, well, this is a nice wank for the Brodeur boys.
That's what she said.
I got introduced to gaming similarly to you, and a lot of my gaming influences on you, but when I moved out of mom's house, long after you'd moved away, doing your own thing, going to college, living with that, I played a shit ton of Shadowrun.
Right.
What was the game when you're in high school, and then the game in college, if it was a different game, what were the things that you guys really gravitated?
Well, as you know, I came up on Blue Box. And then we got 1st edition.
Not Blue Waffle.
We call it 1st edition now. Back then we called it AD&D. So AD&D. Now, the high school guys I was very blessed is that cause I was a sophomore and they were juniors, so they were a year ahead of me. But 2 of the guys I gamed with them, they were the guys that I gamed with the most. They were a little more sophisticated in the game. So we very early on, that game group, we played some AD&D. And we had some really fun AD&D games. And they were both excellent DMs, excellent I didn't DM then. I only played. I DM'd when I was a kid, Blue Box, because I was the only one who knew how to do it. And then I met these guys, and I was pretty much only a player. We had 2 DMs, one of whom was, they were both great in their own ways, right? One of whom, the one who was most consistently, like, I want to game, I'm going to game Friday. He was really into Chivalry and Sorcery, which is a great rule set. It's very challenging. And the Columbia Games Harn World, which, as you know from the giant wall poster, is still one of my greatest passions. I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions. My opinion, with the printed game world that I enjoy more than any other by a wide margin, is Columbia Games Harn. And so we would play the Chivalry and Sorcery rules on the Harn setting. So we had a very advanced, very difficult, deadly rule set on a very detailed, low fantasy, politics infused, and that was the thing. And again, I'm just very blessed when everybody I knew was doing dungeons and traps and I'm a 17th level plus 19, blah, blah, blah. We were like, okay, we've got this world, we've got politics, we have this wizard, but his spells aren't reliable, that sort of thing.
In my experience, what you had was rare.
Yes.
I mean, frankly, by today's standard, what you had as a child at the early days of the hobby is rare compared to how people game today.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. And just go down a rabbit hole here. One of the things I think that is not unusual for me is that the guys that I game with have been for, in some cases, 35 years. My best friends, right? It's funny, one of the things I was thinking about, what's he going to ask me, was like, how has this influenced my life? It's like, friends. I can count on one hand close friends that don't game. And I'm not even kidding. And I have friends at work. And, the soccer dads and the Cub Scout dads, and these are all guys that I like and respect and can spend time with, but it's not the same. There's something about that, even though, X-Files jokes aside, right? You don't play D&D as long as I have and not learn a few things about courage. What's a great line? In the courage thing is a joke, but you get to know people in a different way. It is, even though it's made up and even though it's in our heads, and it's a shared experience, and it's a shared experience of excitement, of loss. It means something if you, an NPC that you care about, and there's NPCs I can think about for the game you were in, or the reunion campaign, right? God, I forget his name, but remember the guard we knew who got killed by the Chaos Beast?
I do.
And you couldn't save him, right? There was nothing that could be done, right? But this dude we know, and he's, of course I was the DM, right? So kind of in a way it was me, right? He's bleeding out on this road outside this inn, and there's nothing we can do, right? That's a shared experience that it's made up, and we all know it's made up. But there was a moment where we felt a real emotion. We all felt it together at the table. That builds friendships.
That's why I asked you to be on the show, is that kind of insight. That's the kind of thing that I don't think that everyone, we can't have the same experience, but for some of us, I do believe that the experience with the hobby does go deeper than just being superficial. We get together, we have some beer and pretzels, we throw some dice and we kill some monsters. Not that there's anything wrong with that kind of gaming.
Absolutely not.
I'm not here to prosecute wrong fun. I'm simply saying is that is special, and those rare moments are what I'm looking for. But not only have you been a tabletop gamer for most of your life, but there was a time, it was in the 90s, was that right?
Mid-late 90s, yeah.
Mid-late 90s, you were part of a company called Easy 8 that did a tabletop World War II game.
Yeah, that is true. When I got my master's degree here in Kansas City, and I didn't focus on my master's degree as much as I should have, because when I moved to Kansas City to come to school here, I found on a lark a tabletop game and hobby run by, Mr. Kilgore, who has, because we gamed together over time, become one of my dearest friends, very close friend. At the time, I barely knew him. I just knew the shop. So they were gaming in the shop, and there was the, Warhammer League and the formula of GW. At the time, I thought I would be interested in that, but very quickly I realized I wouldn't be interested in that. But kind of one thing led to another, one conversation led to another, and a buddy of mine said, hey, you need to come out on Tuesday nights. There's these guys that are writing a World War II game. It's kind of homebrew. You should check it out. Come out, I check it out, love it. So it kind of became my Tuesday night thing. If school allowed, if rehearsal allowed, I went out there on Tuesday nights. And the game was in development. So there would be, we'd be playing the game, be like, man, I like the game. This was me talking, but someone would say, man, I like the game, but this isn't working. Someone else would say, man, I like the game, but this isn't working. We started going to this bar, Cruisers, after games, and I would sit down with the guy who created it, Brad, and his buddy Devin, who was kind of they were the main heart of the operation, and we would just be bullshitting over a beer. And I would be like, well, you're right. Well, what about this? What about this? And there was one thing in particular. It was how we handled the Overwatch rule, or and we don't have to worry about the answer. But I was like, what we need to do for Overwatch is we need to do this. And then Brad's like, do you want in?
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, yeah. So we had, and I won't get into names, although it's easy to look up. There's a local author who's an Army veteran, very successful person on multiple fronts, and he'd written a very successful book. He doesn't like to be referred this way, but normal people would think of it as Tom Clancy-esque, but not a hack, not knockoff. It's a very, very good book, and he wrote a whole series of books, but they were kind of in that genre of modern, current military, alternative stuff, right? So he enjoyed the game, and he threw up some money. And so we started publishing, and the thing is that there were two things going against us. One, none of us had any real business experience. I've since completely changed careers, and I actually have a modicum of business experience, and I look back and I feel sick at some of the stuff we did. And then the other thing is that we'd completely missed the zeitgeist of gaming at the time, because both role-playing and miniature games in the mid-late 90s were moving away from the AD&D combat computer and towards fudge dice. Now that's a huge spectrum, right? But we were moving towards the fudge dice away from the combat computer. Our game was much closer to the combat computer side of the spectrum than the fudge dice And then we made some other mistakes that were more on the business side. Eventually, both because of personal issues and because of creative differences, but I'm bumping you kind of, get your spinal tap going. I left the company. I think that they've basically are hibernating, for lack of a better word. I believe the products are still available on a print-on-demand basis. But I happen to know the guy who still owns it, the head guy, Brad, and I don't think he's doing anything with it. By utter coincidence, the son of that author is one of my best friends. He comes over not infrequently, and we game together and hang out together, and his wife and I, we spend a lot of time together.
One of the experiences that I was always envious of when I would go to a convention and I would see the production that EZ8 would put on. So you'd have Battleground World War II. You would have a table set up for a specific scenario in your time slot in the gaming room or gaming hall of said convention. And you guys always, and I don't say this to prop you up because you're my brother, but you guys always had a good crowd. Regardless of who was there running the game, you guys had beautiful tables that you put together. Now, most of that was your work, yes?
The actual modeling of the tabletop terrain was usually me. I definitely took the lead on that. They were my designs. It was mostly my work with the assistance of the other guys. Now, Brad, the other lead guy, you've met him. He's a natural presenter. I mean, at the time I think he still is in a large way. He's an entrepreneur now, which involves a lot of selling. At the time, his job was selling. So he had that carnival barker thing. I don't say that in a derogatory way. I say that in a very positive way. And then, of course, Devin, he was neither of those things, but he had a personality and a charisma so that once somebody came up, Devin could kind of get them in a conversation. So the three of us in that respect were a very good team. And if you'll allow me to brag for a moment, at one of these shows at Fort Wayne, Indiana, at Alliance, I don't know if does Alliance still, there used to be the Alliance show. Are they still the distributor?
So yes, there is Alliance, and then they had the Alliance Open House was a show that they do, but that's for retailers. I don't know about a specific Alliance con.
Right. No, this wasn't a con. This was the Alliance Open House. Okay. But we came as vendors, right?
Sure.
Because Alliance distributed our game. So we brought our whole kit, right? We brought, because I mentioned I have a theater degree. So we used theater techniques to build this folding table that you could jump on or dance on, but you could also fold it up and fit it easily in a small truck or a small trailer. So we brought that. We brought this whole table, the whole thing, right? And, swear to God, Gary Gygax was there. And Gary Gygax, you may know, his first game was a World War II game called Tractics.
I did not know this.
Yeah, Gary Gygax's first game, TSR's first game, I believe, I know it was Gary's first game, was a World War II game called Tractics.
Tractics?
See, you get it?
Like
Tracts and
yes,
tactics.
yes.
So I walked up to Gary Gygax at his booth and I'm like, hi, my name's me. I have this World War II game. I'd really love you to come try it. And he, of course, gets this all the time, right? And he's like, well, I'll come take a look. He comes over, sees our table, sees our setup, and says, yeah, I want to play.
Kick ass.
It was kick ass. And in fact, he gave us a quote for the back of the book.
Now, this, I hope, was not one of the scenarios where someone at the table got butthurt, because you guys had developed a reputation. You would go to conventions and you would put together these remarkable tables, but then you'd have one scenario where things would go a little bit paranormal or a little bit sideways.
Yeah,
and inevitably there'd be some fucking grognard. There'd be some guy who was upset about the paint on the hem of the collar of the whatever uniform jacket.
The rivet counters.
Yeah. And they would just shit their bed because their troops just got attacked by, I don't know, space Nazis or ninjas or
ice trolls.
My personal favorite. Yeah.
Yeah, mine too. We actually published that one. Well, here's the funny thing about that. Do you know where we got that idea?
No.
Gary Gygax.
That's awesome.
Gary Gygax in Tractors. This might have been in D&D. I think it was in D&D. But if you have the Best of Dragon Volume 1, which I still own, and you can get this online as well. I wish I could remember the name. We'll have to Google it and put it in the show notes, or if you do something like that. But it was like Sturmgeschütz and Sorcery, right? So stormtroopers and Sorcery. So the scenario is that this World War II platoon in Russia, combined arms task force, whatever, doesn't matter. So these German troops have all gathered together, a mortar team and some soldiers and a half-track and a commander and blah, blah, blah. And they, are heading off into the forests of Russia to look for some partisans. And they end up in this mist. And then they're like, wait, there's not a castle on this map.
So good.
The evil Germans have gone through the fog into the evil necromancer, sorcerer, or whatever's command post. And so his trolls and all that attack, right? And so there's a whole magazine article, and it's in Best of Dragon. It was published in Dragon about this scenario. And that was what inspired all those little twists we would do. The most famous one that we did was called Arctic Thunder. And this was one that I wrote. And it was sort of the same but inverted scenario. In this case, it was Russians, in the north of Russia. And one of their commanders has crashed in the snow, and then he's got the vital map or whatever, right?
He's got the MacGuffin.
He's got the MacGuffin, yeah. So they've got to go get the MacGuffin, so I've got these Russians in long coats, and they're supported by one of those early war crappy tanks, and if you're not into tanks, this won't mean anything to you. And they're marching across the tundra to get the thing, and then this loud horn blows, and the ice trolls start popping them around them. And of course, the ice trolls are awesome, and they can throw a Russian and bash them to rocks, but also, guns, or, anti-tank rifles, or, which is, basically a giant, what, if you think of now of the modern Barrett 50 cal, right? Except meaner and with a longer barrel, and then, flamethrowers and a tank. And so that was the game. And when we presented that game, we would not put it in the con book as that. We would put it in the con book just as Russian patrol, possibly fighting some Finnish ambush or something, right? No one would know. The Russians would just go in expecting Finns. We would pull the Finn players off to the side and tell them, well, guess what? The Finns are actually ice trolls. And then all of a sudden it would happen.
That's so good.
And it would happen every now and again that someone would would put on a faux upset, like one of these grognards, as we call them, which was a history to that word, but one of these old.
And I use grognard affectionately. Like, I refer to some people as grognards. Sometimes it's it's like a lot of other words. It has multiple meanings.
I might be a grognard.
Yeah, I think you are.
In some places, I'm definitely a grognard.
Yeah, you are.
Some of them would get a little off-putting, like, this isn't what I signed up for. So I had a speech all planned out. I'm like, I understand, this is weird, this is not for everybody. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll get you in one of my games tomorrow. You can go ahead, and just not one person ever left.
That's awesome. Did you ever have to switch people?
I don't remember having to switch.
You can't, right? Because you can't take somebody who's a Finn and they're like, oh, I'm a snow troll, fuck it, I want to play a Russian instead.
It was a long time ago. It was literally 20 years ago. I'm sure that happened. I'm sure that happened at some point, but maybe not, because of course, as you say, then that other person knows the secret, right? So that, I definitely, again, going back 20 years, I think there was more consternation about that, where people would feel kind of off-put, but by and large, people were cool about it. And we did several. We did, Nazis versus the Marines on the island. The author of the book who gave us the money, he did a great one where the Marines land on the island and it's like Jurassic Park. So they're fighting dinosaurs. That was a really good one. We did basically the same thing as the Arctic Thunder, except it was a German force in the forest in Europe, and they got attacked by wood elves.
That's fun.
Yeah.
I remember one very distinctly. I think it was at an Archon in Collinsville, Illinois one year.
Yeah.
You guys were doing, and I think it was 15 mil. And there were sci-fi. 20. It was 20 mil? Okay. And there were science. It was Nazis had come back from the future.
Yeah.
What was that? What was that scenario?
Well, the scenario is that basically it was an excuse for the rivet counters and the tread heads to get every ridiculous German, because if you're into the World War II tanks, late war German tanks are these ridiculous, oversized, over-armored, over-gunned monstrosities, right? And there's this, if you're into tanks, is like, they did what? Right? Just from an engineering scope, right? So people sell the models for these. Well, we were joking earlier about how I have 9 winged Nazgul for my Lord of the Rings games. I'm like, why didn't I buy 10? Because they only had 9 historically. Well, there would be people who would buy, like, they got 4 of these tanks off the factory line, and people will buy 6 and 8 of them, right? So we wanted to put a game together where we could have all of these tanks crammed into one city fight, right? But we also enjoyed doing the sci-fi thing. And the Soviet tanks, which were super cool at that era, right? And they were honestly more practicable and more reasonable tanks. They just didn't have that kind of like wow factor. So one thing led to another. Somebody had these old resin, actually they came back to me just recently, these old resin tanks that we painted up or whatever. So we put together the game, like, how can we have this game happen? So that was the thing, was that one group of bad guys come back from the future to try to capture the bad guy from the current bad guys. So we used to do these games, what were called double blinds. We would actually have 2 tables. This was how insane we were. It was totally over the top. That's why it didn't work. we would have 2 identical tables set up with a curtain in between. And so so then you have to have 2 of every model.
You're at a convention.
Mm-hmm.
You have 2 4x6, just for the sake of argument.
Yep.
2 4x6 tables, a partition in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
and side A can see all of their stuff.
Yep.
And what they've discovered of side B,
Yep.
and then at the other table, it's the reverse.
Yep.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a nightmare.
It is a nightmare. It's also the most fun miniature gaming you'll ever do. So what was fun about it was that so the Germans were like, oh my god, we got all this stuff, we're badass, we've got a jet fighter airstrike coming in, we're the coolest thing in the world. And then all of a sudden their biggest, baddest tank just suddenly explodes, right? And they're like, what happened? Like, no, it was the weirdest thing. Like, this unguided rocket just made a perfect hit right on the commander's thing. What? And then it just goes downhill from there, right? And the whole thing was just an excuse to create this ridiculous, just to put this ridiculous force on the table. Because like, in this context of the way these game rules are set up, like realistically, right? You would just drop a whole bunch of artillery on it, or you would bomb it, or you would just sit around and wait 19 minutes for it to run out of fuel. But in the game world, where that's not a consideration for this rule set, it was like, how is this unbeatable? Like, well, okay, but these, whatever they were, 25th century people coming back in time with their ray guns, they're going to take you out. So yeah, that was one that did get a lot of people have memory of that. My favorite was always the Arctic Thunder. That was the one we published, and it just had a charm for me. I still have those figs.
You did another thing professionally in gaming that I think is comparatively quite unique. You were paid to game master for people. You would have people over to your house and they would give you money to run Dungeons and Dragons for them. Now, my brother is very handsome, but he is not a beautiful individual that I would pay to game master topless for me. I don't know how did this happen?
This happened that there were some locals that were all chiropractic students at the local chiropractic college that really, really wanted the game, and because of their situation were not able to game. I was not in the professional position that I'm in now, and that's something we should talk about, is how gaming has affected my professional life, my real professional life.
All right, we'll put a pin in that. We'll be right back.
But so they went into tabletop and they talked to Phil, and they were like, hey, we want to give you money to run games for us. And Phil is an outstanding game master. Phil can fill as many game tables with players as he chooses. And he's like, this isn't worth my money. He's like, he looked around, he's like, I don't know who else he asked. I'm sure he asked somebody else, but I don't care. Eventually it came to me, hey, do you want to do this for these guys? I'm like, yeah, I need coins that can rub together and make noise, and I like running games. So we all agreed that this would be a thing that we did, and we ran quite a few games together, and they paid me, I forget how much it was, honestly.
I suspect that it was not enough.
It probably wasn't enough. This was right after, so again, Battleground fell apart partly because of artistic differences and personal things. A lot of those personal things were my own personal things, where I'd gotten divorced and changed careers and all sorts of, I was in a position where, again, shiny nickels meant a lot to me. And I had all this crap, and my house had a basement. I was like, yeah, we'll do this. So we did it for a while, and they were a great group of guys. They were fun to game, and girls. They were a great group. I enjoyed gaming with them, but they weren't necessarily a group that I would have gamed with for free, but I was happy to be underpaid to game with them. They eventually had their own internal struggle, like A's dating B, and now she's dating C, or whatever. I don't care. None of my business. And their group fell apart. Eventually they tried to come back, and we talked about some ideas, different, same core, but different peripherals, and we talked about some campaign ideas, and then, I don't know, they never contacted me again, and that's fine.
Yeah, it's funny. So many people out there are bothered by the idea of paying for game mastering. And the only argument that I want to bring up that I have not brought up before, and not that I've talked about it on this show, people pay to read books, they pay to go to the movies, they pay for television services, etc. I don't think paying for gaming is any worse by any stretch of the imagination. But then I think too, I would pay you to run the style tabletop World War II con game, right? I pay to go to a convention. I pay extra to participate in games at the convention. What's the distinction?
I don't know. I mean, I obviously didn't have a problem with it. Obviously, I paid for con games. Like, I know at Gen Con, for example, there's tickets, and the tickets cost money, and they differ in quality. Like, I remember famously when we went to Gen Con in 2013.
Oh, yeah,
that Star Wars game. It was like, we're going to do Geonosis, and it's going to be all the clones versus all the droids, right? And I was playing that other miniature game, and you went over there, you're like, oh my God, because it was like $14 tickets. Yeah. And I remember we exchanged them because it was just the battle mat, laminated battle mat was something. I mean, I'm not paying you $14 for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So you said, I say so a lot. It's irritating. Like when I edit, I have to dump, and this will get in there because people will be annoyed. I'm going to leave that so in. And instead of doing the work to take the so out so the audience isn't annoyed, I'm just going to explain why I left it in.
Yeah, I think alienating your audience at this stage in your endeavor is a brilliant idea.
It's really a great idea. But you were saying that gaming has had an impact not only on your personal life and your friendships. At one point, it was a professional endeavor, but in your current profession, gaming has had an impact on what you're doing professionally now.
Yeah, no, and to me, this is so I used to do theater and television. That's what my degrees were in. That's what the first half of my life, what I did. And then for various reasons that are not interesting for this particular podcast, I completely switched careers. The very high level version is that for what I was going to do in Kansas City in terms of theater or television, I would have had to wait for the people who had those jobs to die or retire, hopefully, or I would have had to move to New York or LA. I actually looked into moving to New York. I went there once and I was like, being a suburban person, this is not something I'm capable of doing. And LA held no charm for me. So I needed to switch careers. And so through a series of funny events, I ended up working in industrial construction. I do planning and construction management and cost forecasting in industrial construction for gigantic power plants and oil and gas facilities, preferably billion-dollar jobs, but always $100 million+ jobs. And so in doing that, I do a lot of coordination. I do a lot of dealing with people. And people always ask, how did you make this transition? And from theater, and a lot of theater is the same thing. In theater, as a stage manager, I used to deal with costumes. I used to deal with sets. I used to deal with lights. Now I deal with civil. I deal with mechanical. I deal with electrical. So that transition is that. But in terms of thinking fast on my feet and having a problem presented to me on a sheet of paper, here's a drawing, here's a general arrangement, which is like a looking down plan view, a map, one might say, of a plant. And thinking, okay, we have this task where we have to have this crane and these people. We have this task which has this exclusion zone, which means no one can be within 30 feet of it. That sounds familiar. On this map, right? How does this all work together? Also, this guy's got a personality. That guy's got a personality. Hana. That's all DMing, right? Years of DMing. And this was kind of my specialty, especially on the mega job that I did, the big coal plant. There was literally a $20 billion budget on this job, right? And we had dozens of contractors on this huge project site. And my job on that site was to look at an area and be like, okay, you have it now. You're getting it next. You're going to get it on this date. I need you out of there by this date. You're going that way. He's going this way. And everything I did was exactly the sort of problem that I would solve as a DM or as a player, right? Like as a player, I'd be like, okay, we've got to attack this base. What do we do, right? So it was those looking at a piece of ground, at moving pieces and personalities all at once. That's role playing, and that's what I do at my job a lot.
If you had the opportunity to do Battleground all over again, right? So you do have that time machine. The caveat is that, Ken Heitz and Time Incorporated said that the only thing you get to do is fix Battleground. That's it. It's the only thing you got to do. What would you do differently now?
Well, the number one issue I had with Battleground was I felt that our art style and our figures were not up to the standards of the time. And making a miniature game even in the 1990s, let alone in the 2000s, with bad figures is that is a 100% hard stop, no go. So there were a lot of reasons why the figs end up the way they did. I'm not casting responsibility on others. I'm not a figure sculptor, but I can look at a fig and tell you that ain't no good.
Yeah, it's just like people argue that if you don't do my job, you can't do my job. Well, we've all been to a fucking restaurant. We all know what shitty service is. We all know what shitty food is. It's a ridiculous argument. But anyway.
Yeah, it is. No, I mean, those figs were not up to the standard. Our art was not up to the standard. A buddy of mine who has a miniature company now and it does role-playing game and it's in the fantasy setting, so he's got his own world.
The Free Blades guys?
Yeah, the Free Blades guys. Yeah, I should have hooked you up with John. I will fix that.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, it's a 4-hour drive. I'll be back.
So, yeah, and you have a place to stay. But John said he said, what piece of gaming advice could I give someone? And it was the best advice I ever heard. He said, more artists, less friends. But that was some smart shit right there. More artists, less friends.
Wow.
And that was what killed us, was the artist was our friend. And so we had one artist and he was our friend. And so that was no bueno. There's a lot of business things that I would do different. I had not, again, I've got such a different life experience than I did now. So the more artists, less friends would be the number one thing. Being a little bit smarter about how we forecast our cost, which is a phrase I didn't even know how to say back then. And then the second, I think we spent too much time doing the rule set we thought was cool than the rule set that the environment wanted at that time. So that's a lot to fix. So I'm going to need some help from Time Incorporated.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you need some serious help because you can't fix that, right? Because you guys just decided we're going to write the game that we want to play.
Right.
But as you said earlier, the industry was moving in a much, much different direction.
Yeah.
And I mean, how could you even do that game today?
Yeah, there's probably a market for another World War II skirmish game. The challenge is that even with historicals, if you want to make money, you got to sell figs. Plastic tooling, and plastic's the way to go in the modern times. Plastic tooling is very expensive, startup cost. And why would you buy my plastic figs when Warlord Games already sells plastic figs? So I've got to make mine better. I know how to do that, which is to not have the guns be separate from the hands. What the hell? But they're fixing that. They're already fixing that. Their later kits already have that. So, yeah, I don't know if that would not be, again, that's not the thing I would fix. But if that's what, Ken says, then by God, I'll do my best to meet Ken's requirements. And that's how I would do it. So
I envision a future where tabletop miniature games, where everything's print on demand. All of it. I'm just going to run a Kickstarter for PDFs and STL files. That's what I do. And then there's the living document rules, it's constantly up to date on my website, which some companies already do. Well, I release a new miniature. I don't ever produce the miniature. All I do is pay the sculptor, and then that file gets sent to you, my patron and or consumer, and then you figure out what you're going from there.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think that's where the future's going. I don't think it's as near as people think. And I say that as the owner of a 3D printer that one of my friends has referred to as a boat anchor. The thing about owning a 3D printer in current year, I hate that phrase, but the thing about owning a 3D printer is that makes you a 3D printer technician. I do not have any interest in being a 3D printer technician.
Thus, I don't own one.
Which is why these movement trays are about the best thing that I can get out. Because if you want to get results, even with the resin printer, if you want to get results for a fig, be like, yeah, that's a nice fig. I'm going to paint that and be proud of it. The technology has to advance a lot to make it both affordable and user-friendly, or you're going to be hitting that niche of people that A, like your game, and B, like 3D printing.
It's interesting too. For example, if you want, you can buy STL files. You can buy 3D digital files. You can pay other people to print them for you. For example, Impact Miniatures, I know they're one of only 2 or 3 specific companies that are approved by Hero Forge to make their figs. I think it's like any technology. Eventually it's going to come down, and that's what we're going to do. So the final subject that I want to broach is that you are father to my 3 wonderful nephews.
Yeah.
And as I like to say to people who have children that they're teaching to game, that you are making sure to raise them right as the next generation of gamers. So your boys, I know the answer to these questions, but I'm going to ask you. So you've got 3 sons, and they're what ages?
They are 12, 10, and 8.
And all 3 of them game? So what kind of frustrations do you run into? Because you're now bridging you're bridging between game master or referee, wrangler, and dad on top of it. So you're wearing both of those hats at one time. How fucking frustrating is that?
It's interesting because, you talk a lot about Fear the Boot, and this is, about handling inter-player issues, right? So do I handle these as a DM or a dad? And the answer is not always dad. So that's really interesting for me. And like a fight, if the kids were having upstairs, that if we're down here at the D&D table, I might just let them have it. Up to a point, right? So, but then, of course, the sibling rivalry stuff, right? Is like this boy gets all the time. And so what you find, just like with adult role playing, is that if player A and player B are having a difficulty outside, that difficulty will come to the table. So if middle boy and younger boy, if middle boy feels like younger boy's dominating time, and then he comes in and he's getting even what I might perceive as a fair amount of screen time or, spotlight time, it's going to spark a thing because there's that outside stuff. And of course, and I know the whole thing because I have to live with it, especially now where I cannot escape. And so, so it's interesting, but at the same time, it's so fun. When the 8-year-old was explaining to me and his, how he talks, he explains everything a lot. He really
that kid's wicked smart.
He is
right?
wicked. He's dangerous smart.
Yeah,
it's a problem.
It's amazing just listening to him because he monopolized my time.
I know.
Not a complaint tonight.
I know.
At all. But it's fascinating to listen to him talk. Because how are you that fucking smart?
He's smart.
You're 8 years old.
But he was explaining how that he knew a thing because he heard us talking about it at the table, but his character wasn't there, so he could not act on it at 8.
I'm going to cry. I'm absolutely going to cry.
And of course, in being him, he explained it and explained it and explained it again to the point where the middle boy's like, wah!
Yeah, well, because, so as Brodeurs, there are things that we do. We like the sound of our own voices.
Oh, Jesus.
We love to talk.
Oh, no, I sound awesome.
But you're youngest, man. I love to repeat shit. Brodeurs repeat shit. And as we age, we repeat shit, right? Like.
It wasn't me, you understand.
I've watched dad become grandpa. I've watched you slowly becoming dad. I've watched me slowly becoming dad. But I feel like that when he turns 30, Joseph's gonna tell one story. And that's his only communication he's ever gonna have is that story for the rest of his life.
And it wasn't me. He's gonna point at the sky. It wasn't me.
So, but you do, you have those moments then where you say, I need to handle this as game master or referee and not as dad. Yeah. So your tone of voice, I assume, is totally different?
Yeah.
Or do they recognize the distinction between dad and DM?
I don't think so because they've only been with me as a DM. Oh, actually, I take that back. That is not true because my oldest cousin who just started as a freshman in college, he has DM'd for them as well. So I don't know, I hadn't thought about it. And even as I was saying that, I'm like, is there a difference? Do I talk to you guys any different than I do to the kids?
No, you do not. And that is why I am able, those guys know you very, very well, but just being genetically similar, that's when I can sense your disappointment and anger and things, because if I was in your position, I would probably be upset with them too.
Well, I think there's another element to that, just between you and me and the world, which is that because of our unique background and our desire to see flaws and expect anger and expect negatives, right? So I think that you're seeing that certainly more than I intend it to be there, and maybe even more than it's actually there. Sometimes it depends. We'll get into this other thing off mic, but.
Well, Bob Brodeur, it was absolutely, or Brodeur the Elder, I should call you, as the seldom used Fear the Boot forums.
Yes.
But anyway, Bob, it was really a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm glad I did it. I know that you were reticent, apprehensive. Is that the right verbiage?
Well, no, I think the right, I'm happy to do it. As you say, I love to talk. I think my thing is that it doesn't matter. I'm happy to do it. I wasn't sure what to expect. And
you are valuable to me, and this is a vanity project for me. So there we go.
There you go. Awesome. Well, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. I enjoyed it.